Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. Well, in this session, we're going to talk about assessment, making it work for you. Now, assessment is a very, very important thing at the Open University. It's the way that you get your grades and ultimately your qualification. And sometimes it can be a little bit of a daunting prospect, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, Peter Taylor and Sally Crighton here from STEM and Mathematics are here to tell us why it's something to embrace. But before we do that, I'm just going to order a cup of tea because Michelle left her tea bell here. So, at home, we would like to know assessment in 3 words. 3 words that sum up assessment to you. If you can only think of 1 or 2 or 3, just add the ones that you can and a full stop. Also, multiple choice questions. My feelings towards assessment are, so whether you have fear and loathing or you're really looking forward to it, whether you've looked at your assessment yet. And if you haven't, then you might want to watch the catch-up a little bit later where Georgina Blakely showed us all about the VLE, the Virtual Learning Environment, and how to find your assessment. And also top tips from student Rob this morning about printing off your TMA question and putting it on your computer so that you always know what it is. Do you understand its purpose? And also, what are your thoughts if you have an important task? And then what do you do once you've started that task? So to vote on those widgets, please just click on the one that you'd like to let us know what you think. And then when you've submitted your results, you can see what everyone else at home says also. So, Peter, you're, amongst other things, a module team chair and also you're director of the assessment programme.
Indeed.
Sally, a resident statistician in the maths department. Why is assessment important at the Open University? Why are we doing it?
Well, contrary to what some students think, that we do it deliberately to make their life difficult, I think there are 2 purposes of assessment. One is that we need to have some kind of way of measuring progress, and measuring how well students are doing in terms of achievement and making sure then that the credit that they get and the degree they get is appropriate. But more importantly, I think assessment is an important learning tool. So by doing something and actually trying to answer the questions, sometimes getting things right, sometimes getting things wrong, and then having some kind of dialogue about the things that worked and the things that don't work, you actually kind of feed back and think about it, and it helps move you forward.
Now, there are different sorts of types of assessment, aren't there? And there are all these nice words like TMA and iCMA and EMA and exam that students will start getting to grips with. Can you introduce us to those concepts and broadly what they are?
So there's basically 2 types. There's a kind of continuous assessment and then something that happens at the end of the module. So in the continuous assessment, there are these tutor-marked assignments, or sometimes there are interactive computer-marked assignments, iCMAs, and these happen at particular points during your study of the module, and they deal with often the learning that you've just taken, kind of been studying, the things you've been working on, and they then follow on one from each other, building up your overall knowledge around the module. Then at the end of it, there's usually a more synoptic activity, either an end of module assessment, which is a written type activity, or an examination, which measures your overall kind of understanding and achievement of the module.
Okay, brilliant, excellent.
Aren't there some sessions coming up soon about exams and
We are.
EMAs?
We're doing some Student Hub Live sessions all about exams, so watch out for those in just before the exam period. And also we've got our workshops that we do. Thank you for reminding me, Peter, because those will be really, really important. So Sally, in mathematics, it surely must be easier to do your TMAs and iCMAs and EMAs because there must be one right answer for everything. So so how does it work then in terms of students doing these things, and how do they also know that their grades are sort of right? We were talking about this before with our tutors as well, sort of saying, you know, actually they're standardised ways of marking things.
That's a really good question, Karen. I think in maths the most important thing is it's in fact, in maths, unlike any subject, if you're looking through your module material, you can say, oh yes, that's fine. Or if you look at some sort of mathematical thing that somebody else is doing, then that's all fine. But how do you know that you can actually do it yourself?
Yeah.
How do you know that actually, if you try to write something down, that you can follow the steps through that the person was talking to you about it? So it's all new, and it might be for some people. I know some people out there will be thinking, maths, oh no, it's awful, I can't do it. But for us, the thing is, you can't do it yet.
Yeah.
So what I think is a good thing to do and a really good strategy
Yeah.
is, I think you were talking about somebody printed off a TMA to actually say, okay, this is what I would like to do in my assessment, and have it there so that if you're reading something, you can say, okay, let's try that and do it as you go along.
Yeah.
And it also helps you keep up with the module calendar.
Yes.
Because we asked our students, what's your top tip for getting through? And they were saying, just try to keep up with the module calendar if you can. And especially if you're doing more than one module, but that's another story. But it's all about practicing yourself, taking the material and writing it down yourself.
Yeah.
Like playing the piano, learning a language, you just have to keep practicing.
And also at level 1, you're a chair of a level 1 module, so I wonder if you can just tell the students again about sort of what to expect, both in terms of how much it matters and also how the sort of weighting of the various assignments can also start from not being a huge contributor to increasing in scale.
Yes, that's a really good question as well, Karen. I think that the first TMA will be something to settle you in, to start getting used to the language of the subject, to say, okay, we're talking about maths, and this is how a mathematician would write something down. And the first TMA, tutor marked assessment, is all about, this is what I think I'd like to write down, and your tutor saying, here are my comments about it. So it's really good to get to know your tutor. You had tutors on before, and start learning that as you go along. And then as the module goes on, the TMAs can be a higher weighting. And actually, that's completely fine, because you're learning as you go along, and you're always working with your tutor and with other students as well, actually, and with the module team to help you to pace, to help you to learn. And it's all a really good, not scary thing. It's totally fine to look at your TMA and say, oh no, I don't know how to do that, because of course you don't. That's why you're learning.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's see what people at home said when we asked them what 3 words they associate with assessment. Scary. Weirdly. Assess my learning. Nerve-wracking. 360 feedback. Daunting. Critical. Revision. Testing knowledge. Actually fun. Excellent. Somebody's got them. It's success in learning. Improving essay writing. So here's the thing, Peter. One of my students was just doing their 3rd assignment, and they said to me, "Oh, it's not brilliant. I still haven't got it right." And I thought, well, why should you have it right now? Because it's only your 3rd assignment at level 1. I mean, maybe in 12 years, but not now. You know, it's all about learning, isn't it?
It is, and in many ways, if at the beginning of the module you look at the assessments, they are going to be scary, because you won't have actually done the learning in order to answer them. So it's only when you're actually doing that kind of learning, keeping the assessment in mind, thinking about what kind of things it's asking. So you've got an idea about, oh, I need to concentrate on that bit because I remember that's in the assessment. You can actually then build up your kind of knowledge and skills to be able to answer the assessment. But as you said, I mean, you're not going to do everything perfect. And to some extent, sometimes that's a difficult thing to kind of accept, that everything isn't quite as perfect as you like it to be. But I think, if the time is there, you put it in, whatever you do, don't kind of hold on to it and try and make it perfect. Submit it, move on, because if it's 95% perfect, then that's good enough.
Yeah, and as we were saying earlier, people have other things going on, and you don't have to be perfect or good, all the time. It's okay to sort of have that variation there. Sally, you mentioned the study planner, and also this idea again of having TMAs that go through regularly. I mean, most students on a 60-point module might have, say, 5 or 6 things to do, and that thing might be about once a month or so. So there's a sort of pace to it. It's very important to sort of use that to keep on track of things, isn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is when you see your TMAs, you can see where the cut-off dates are. So you can take a note of them for the entire module. They might coincide with all kinds of other things that happen in your life. But I think one of the most important things we've kind of touched on is, you're going to have a TMA. So it's really, really good to get it started, to actually move there's lots of evidence to suggest if you move yourself off a blank page, then you've made a good start to rather than leaving things to the last moment.
Yes, no, exactly. Michelle was saying that she's got an assignment due in about 2 weeks or something, like ages away. I thought, oh gosh, and she's worrying about that now. But for some people, it's important to plan and it's important to learn at your own pace, isn't it? I mean, Peter, this whole idea of feedback and things, for many students who may be coming to education after some time or may not have had positive experiences, being marked or having this feedback can feel a bit threatening. But equally, it's something that we all get used to because we're always having constructive feedback and criticism of our own work. And being an academic involves that whole process, doesn't it?
But the feedback is very much a kind of a learning process. So how can you improve what you've done unless someone actually gives you some pointers about how you can improve it? So the key thing about kind of Open University TMAs is that there is really good feedback associated with it, which should help the student kind of with their knowledge and their skills, not only understanding the things that they've missed out on in the previously, but also in preparing for the next TMA. And so it's really important that students put some time aside to look at that feedback, because as a student you may have spent, you know, a number of hours constructing this TMA. You kind of send it off and you then breathe this sigh of relief. You kind of a week or two later, you then get something back that gives you a score. You know, you're either elated or not. But you then say, oh, I'll look at that feedback later. And then you get caught up with all the next kind of bit of learning and you never quite get round to looking at the feedback. So I think it's really important that people build in time to look at the feedback and think about what it's telling them, because it really is personalised teaching.
Because very often people make the same mistakes over and over again, and it's very hard to correct that, as I know when I constantly reach out for certain things I know I shouldn't. You know, we're ingrained to sort of revert back to type. It's hard to sort of shift from that. But equally, you know, sometimes students will receive the same feedback, but maybe don't deal with it. How would you recommend they sort of try to take on board some of that feedback, to use it, to feed forward to that next piece of work?
I think you need to reflect on it. So what is my tutor saying to me about this? What are the key points here? There'll be some things which are quite straightforward. Oh, well, you made a mistake with that little bit or that bit. But then there's the more kind of general way. It's, you know, it may be to do with your approach to answering a question. It may be to do with the way that you structure your essay. So taking that on board and thinking, well, how will I structure my essay differently next time, I think is really quite important, because as Sally said, you know, each subject has its own kind of way of doing things, often its own language, its own requirements around answering questions.
And learning that language requires practice, doesn't it? You become more acquainted with the terms, the ideas, the way of expressing yourself, don't you?
But also the style in which you create the kind of the arguments, etc., and the way you use evidence to back up the answer.
Yeah. And different disciplines, I know many students who come to the social sciences from maybe the arts will say, oh, this is a different way of presenting an argument. So there's skills as well as the content. We've got a session, actually, Isabella and I are doing on making the most of your feedback, and tickets are available for that because the places are limited. That's an Adobe Connect. So if you'd like to find out more about that session and book yourself a place on it, then do look at the Student Hub Live website for more information. OK, so we're all into hacks at the minute because we heard from Rob earlier today about how he has the TMA question, which was a wonderful idea. What's your advice then, Peter, about using the student guidance to write your assignments?
So the thing to do is to look at the assignment and what it's actually asking you, and then to try and perhaps deconstruct some of the sentences to really think about what is it actually asking me to? What does this word mean in this particular context? And always, or usually associated with the TMA, there are some guidance notes which help you do that deconstruction. So looking at the guidance notes, understanding what the questioner is asking, and making sure you respond to that when you're constructing your answer. And the other thing is around the percentages of marks for each particular question reflect how kind of significant, what priority you need to put into each of the questions, say, within a TMA.
And there are also often word limits that could be another numeric indicator, can't they, about how much time you should spend looking at certain things. Yeah,
so kind of the word limit, the kind of the marks will help you get a feel for just how much you need to put into it. But as I said, really making sure you answer the question that is being asked rather than the question that you would like to be asked.
No, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things, I guess, in terms of how do you know you've done a good enough job? And part of what you're saying is sort of looking at that word count, but also the guidance, because you could spend 250 words writing something that isn't the right level of detail, for example, if you haven't read the question. So even though you've met one factor, it may be another one that's missing. So it's important to look at that. I mean, it's one of those things. How do you know that you've answered the question?
I mean, it depends on the subject as well. So I presume in maths, there's, you know, if you've got to work out a particular formula or whatever, then the achievement's a lot easier. And coming from science as well, you know, I find it fairly straightforward to have an idea of whether I'm going in the right direction and got it right or not. But I think answering more kind of arts and social science questions, it's never quite as simple. And
every word matters, because I've been marking something recently and so many students had missed off one word that was critical because it was added on the end, and you could be forgiven for sort of missing it at the, you know, temptation of talking about other exciting stuff, but actually that was the question. So while you've got all of that guidance, the actual question is just so vital, which is why I love Rob's tip about looking it up. Okay, so we've talked about the marks and the proportions and things like that. And Sally, you mentioned the fear of the blank page as well, and I thought we might sort of move on to talking about common things that people have and how people can start writing and actually sort of move on with their assignments.
Well, I think particularly in maths, as I said, you know, it might be that you see something coming up in your TMA question that you've seen in the book, and then you can write something down. And in maths, how do you know you're doing a good job? Because you kind of look and see how the books have set it out, you learn the language, and you can do that. But I think what I see some students doing, and what I do myself as a student, is not actually writing it down right then. Just do it.
Yeah.
Start writing it down rather than thinking, oh, well, the TMA cut-off date is in a while. Actually start writing it down. And I think that the way people approach their assessment is different in different situations. Yeah. Some people start the task work all the way through. Other people, I have to say, like me, tend to say, oh, well, this cut-off date, and then have a frantic dash. And I think, in a sense, Karen, is that it matters. You know, we're all in the Open University because it really matters. What you write for the TMA matters. So it's almost as if you don't want to write something down in case it's just not the perfect thing to do. So all kinds of studies have shown if you actually write something down. In maths, just keep writing, keep practicing the sums. In an essay, for example, you can't sit down and write the entire thing. So perhaps leave the introduction to the last thing. But my absolute advice, apart from have fun doing it and enjoy it, that's number one. And also, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, but it's a massive thing. Your tutor will be the person, your tutor, you know, Karen, you are a tutor, Peter, you are too, marking your students' work. There'll be tutorials, online tutorials, face-to-face tutorials. There will be help from your tutor to encourage you to do things. But my advice would be, apart from enjoying it and keeping in touch with your tutor, start writing it down. It's my advice to myself as a student every single time.
And the reason I always start writing it down, because it's only in the writing process do things actually start to kind of sort themselves out in my head. So I often will start writing something and I think I know what I'm going to write, but then by the time I've finished it, I've actually moved it all around and I've actually ended up with something very different. Because, you know, when I'm come to start writing, there's lots of ideas, lots of kind of facts, lots of things which are all out there, and I know that they're all interlinked, but it's only when I put them down on paper do I actually start to kind of make sense of it.
So you're almost using the writing to organise your thoughts. It's a process for you, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And people do things in lots of different ways. I've heard people making mind maps, sticky notes, doing notes on, you know, bits of paper and everything like that. But I guess what you're saying is just start doing something and also use it as a process. Okay, let's see what people said, because we need to end, unfortunately, now. But we'll see what they say now about how they feel about assessment. Chance to shine is the most important thing there, which I think is lovely.
lovely.
So you two can go home now. You've done a good job. Other things, planning, positive, determination, need to focus, word counts, fear of the blank page, ambition, draw together information. So some really, really important things here as well. Peter, could I end by asking about your sort of emotional relationship with assessment and thinking again about this whole idea about what students want to achieve?
Well, I think doing anything where you're going to be measured is a kind of frightening task, and something I saw there was nervous on there, and we all get nervous, we all get anxious about it. I can remember even quite silly little exams, I would get really anxious about it.
They weren't silly little exams at the time,
Well,
were they?
there was one I did, it was on...
Here we go.
It was my first aid exam, and I couldn't believe how kind of anxious and kind of worked up I got about this first aid exam a few years ago. And it's about being able to use that anxiety in a creative way, to be able to use it to drive you to kind of write things down, to drive you to get on with reading and revision or whatever. But not and being able to manage it so that it doesn't overtake you and get into a kind of a negative feedback loop, so you never really get going on it. So I think, everybody gets nervous. It's about learning how to use that kind of anxiety creatively.
And I'm also very reassured now, Peter, knowing you're a qualified first aider. So that's all very well and good. Well, thank you both so much. As is usual, I'd love to keep talking to you, but I think you've really done a wonderful job of reassuring people at home and sort of expressing the importance of assessment and some really top pieces of advice about sort of figuring out the weighting, figuring out the importance of it and looking ahead at what's to come and equally accepting the idea that you are learning and it doesn't have to be perfect in the first place. So thank you both so much for that. Well, on that note, we're going to show you another of our student stories. This time we're going to hear from Magda about her way of dealing with assessment. And then we're going to have a short break, which is one of my favourite sessions that we ran a little while ago, about how to use stress well. It's called Study Like a World-Class Athlete, and it talks about the important things to eat, drink and sleep when you're doing your studies. And Isabella will be running a parallel session in Adobe Connect as well, so that's your opportunity to go and find out what her fun game is and take a look at what going to an online tutorial might look like. And if you are going to come to Isabella and my session about making the most from your feedback from your assignments in a couple of weeks' time, then it will be great for you to log on and see what the Adobe Connect rooms look like. The links are in the chat box. Thank you very much, HJ, for putting that in. I will see you shortly.